Good afternoon, everyone in the United States, and good evening to our colleagues in Israel. I'm Etta Heber, the Executive Director of the Center for Jewish Studies, and it is indeed my pleasure to welcome you to today's event, Voices of the Ritual, Devotion to Female Saints and Shrines in the Holy Land, a conversation between Professors Nurit Stadler of Hebrew University of Jerusalem and Ron Hassner of UC Berkeley. Before I turn it over to Ron and Nurit, I'd like to acknowledge and thank our co-sponsors for today's event, the Berkeley Center for the Study of Religion, the Center for Democracy, Toleration, and Religion, and the Berkeley Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. We ask that you please remain muted throughout the session. The presentation is being recorded, but the Q&A will not be recorded. We will not be using the chat today. We're only going to use the Q&A, and please feel free to post your questions at any time during the session. So now it is my pleasure indeed to introduce Ron Hassner, who will then introduce our speaker, Nurit Stadler. So Ron Hassner is the Chancellor's Professor of Political Science, Faculty Director of the Berkeley Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies, and the Helen Diller Family Chair in Israel Studies. His research interests are in religion and conflict, intelligence and interrogation, and Israel studies. Ron is the recipient of several awards, including Berkeley's campus-wide Distinguished Teaching Award, which tells you that Ron is not only an exemplary instructor, but that he is well loved and appreciated by Berkeley students and faculty.
Oh,
Ron, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Etta. That was very kind. So a very good early afternoon to everybody. It is my delight and honor and pleasure to introduce our guest for today from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem, Professor Nurit Stadler. Professor Stadler is a professor of sociology and anthropology. Her research interests include sociological and anthropological theory of religion, the study of fundamentalism, religion and the state, religion, work, and economic practices, the study of rituals, symbols, and practices, the veneration of Mary in the Middle East and Europe, the study of female saint shrines, and the nature of iconography. Stadler is the author of 3 books: Yeshiva Fundamentalism, Piety, Gender, and Resistance in the Ultra-Orthodox World, came out with New York University Press in 2008. A Well-Worn Tallis for a New Ceremony came out with Academic Studies Press in 2012. And Voices of the Ritual, which came out with Oxford University Press just this year, is the focus of our conversation today. Stadler is the director of an ethnographic lab on issues of religion, sacredness, politics, borders, and the nation state. And in her lab, students and researchers from around the world participate in studying and comparing ethnographies of sacred places. So please join me virtually and silently in welcoming her to UC Berkeley. Our focus today is Nurit's newest book, Voices of the Ritual. Nurit asked me to say a few words about it before we engage in questions. You are welcome at any time to type your questions into the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. I will gather those questions together and then direct them to her in the second part of our talk in about 20 minutes, half an hour. In Voices of the Ritual, Nurit explores female saint shrines in Israel and the Palestinian territories. What sets these shrines apart is a set of bodily rituals with female themes, creating what she calls a feminine religious experience. Some of these rituals imitate stages in the cycle of life, from birth to death to rebirth. Fascinatingly, she draws our attention to a revival of these rituals at unique shrines, and she argues that it is war and border conflicts that have led to this revival. By participating in bodily rituals at female saint shrines, worshippers can counter violence and war, and they can celebrate feminine attributes. This, she argues, helps them lay claim to land. To conduct research for this volume, Nurit participated in many of these rituals. She joined processions, prayer services, and ceremonies across the Holy Land. You will have heard of some of the sites she worked in, but not others. Her journey included the tomb of Rachel, the matriarch in Bethlehem, the tomb of Mary, the mother of Jesus in Jerusalem, Mary's well in Ein Karem, the grave of Miriam the laundress, the birthplace of Miriam Bawadri, the crying Madonna in Ramla, and many others. I should add that this beautiful book, I have a copy right here, is also accompanied by wonderful photos of some of the places and rituals that she's describing, and she took many of these photos herself. Wherever she worked, she discovered feminine themes like virtuous motherhood, obstacles to fertility, tragic barrenness, and the suffering of women. She interprets these as challenges to current politics. So ritual is not just a way to appropriate religious space, it's a way to appropriate political space as well. Nurit, to start us off, a two-part question. Could you please describe for us, or define what a female saint shrine is and what a feminine ritual or a feminine religious experience is? Because I assume many of our listeners might think that all shrines are designed for all worshipers, regardless of gender. For example, you describe the significance of rituals that imitate coming out of the womb. Can you tell us a little more about this and similar rituals?
Yes, but Ron, can I just thank everybody for joining us, and thank you and Karen Berkeley, that I'm sorry she couldn't join us, and I hope she will very soon. And of course, Etta Heber and the Center for Jewish Studies in Berkeley. I also want to thank the people from Oxford, especially Ron Grimes, the editor. So to your question, my intention was, my first intention was to study sacred places in Israel, Palestine in general. But then I realized that one of the most important and interesting phenomenon that we can see is that many shrines are dedicated to a female saint. So it's not only a question of experience, because people that are coming to these places are coming from also female and men are coming to these places together. So it's not only a space for female, and it's not only place that female worship, but it's a place that a female saint is at the center. And this was my main intention. And this is how I decided about the places that I want to do the ethnography. And why? Because I started with the idea of female deities, and the fact that for a long time in the history of humanity, people came to visit these places and did a lot of rituals in these places. Let me just give you example like Ishtar and Isis and Aphrodite and many others. So the question was why people are interested in these places. And my first reaction was that people are seeking this great mother and the idea of motherhood. And motherhood is about the origin of life. And then when I started working in these places, I saw that the very, very important aspects of these places are fertility and reproduction. And when I was looking deeply, I was also, when I was actually talking to men and women in these places, they wanted to discuss questions of infertility and problems like barrenness and other problems that are in the center of ritualistic places for a long time. We see this in the literature. So I wanted to see how these things are defined in a place like Israel, Palestine, with the contextual problems and the conflicts and wars around it. So that was my first intention. And then I saw that the experience is a very feminine experience. And this, I think, leads to your question. The ritual itself is very a female had a lot of female aspects in it. And here I saw places that are dedicated to Mary, to Rachel in the Jewish cases, to Miriam, to Hannah, to Mariam. All these female that I call these places that I call them female saints that are around female saints, that their experience is, from my findings, is very unique. What you see in these places is, for example, body-based rituals. So these are rituals that are performed around, especially around body-based practices. So one of the things that I was very surprised was that even though all these places are around the canonical texts from the Bible or from the Bible, the Christian and the Jewish texts, the texts themselves are not so important. And I even found out that people are not really interested to speak with me about the text, even though this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to discuss Rachel in her biblical appearance. I wanted to ask questions about Mary. For example, I was reading at that time the Proto-Evangelion, and I was reading the text that describes Mary and her funeral and the way and the way the apostles buried her. And I wanted to know more about it. And when I was asking those questions, I understood that I will never get any real answers. I wanted to learn text with these people, but they were not interested. They were interested in showing me these body practices like crawling, for example, which is very popular in Christian places. And for example, kissing icons that became very, very important in these places. And so I call them feminine practices around a female figure.
Excellent, thank you. So you've already alluded to some of your important findings. Tell us more of what you found in the book and what your primary sort of research discovery is.
Okay, so I think I can talk about my findings. There are many findings, but I think I can discuss them, especially through the idea of the voice. This is why also I call the book Voices of the Ritual. There are four main voices, because this is the work of this is an ethnography. So I was trying to see the anthropology of these spaces through the idea of the ritual. What I found was especially what I want to call grassroots voices. So the first one I just mentioned is about the idea of the big mother and the origin of life and reproduction. And the idea of this mega symbol, like Wolf was discussing Mary during the 50s. I wanted to, what I found is that through this idea of this big mother, of this deity, we can learn and understand a lot about politics and culture. And we can understand a lot about the relationship between religion and secularism, for example. And mostly we don't, in other books, what we see is that people are studying the relationship between religion and politics through other lenses. And I wanted to see this through the idea of this big mother. So this is the voice of motherhood. The second thing is about the idea of borders. And here we can see the complication of Israel-Palestine and in general the Middle East. What I found in my book, in my work, is that a place that has no borders, no fixed or very clear borders like Israel-Palestine, we can see that these sacred places are becoming very, very important because the border is not clear, and because there is Israel and Palestine and Lebanon and Syria and Egypt and other places that has very difficult relations with Israel with relation to their borders. Sacred places are becoming a way to voice ideas and to voice critics and to voice many ideas that cannot be voiced through other aspects of the state. So this is one thing. The other thing, the third thing about voices is that the people that I found, that I interviewed, are people that are visiting these places. This is what I call grassroots voice. These are people that usually, not always, but usually, especially the people that I talk to, they have no voice in the economic sphere or in the political sphere or in law or etc. These are people who come from places that are not like the elite or the center of Israeli or Palestinian or the Palestinian state. So what they can do is they can express their voice through sacred places, through the sacredness, through religious practices. And I think the fourth voice and the last one can show the connection between the micro and macro level of the experience and of the idea of the ritual. So people, what I found out is that people can create an intimate relations through the ritual in these spaces, and they can claim their lands through these places. So they claim their belonging to the territories through these sacred spaces. So these are like the four, I think, main findings of this book.
Super, and it's a wonderful book. Say just two more sentences. How do you voice criticism, and how do you claim land by means of a ritual at a sacred space? What does that look like?
Okay, so here I have to give you examples. So let me just start with the Tomb of Mary. In the Tomb of Mary, what you see mostly is Palestinians. They can be from the different Christian communities in Jerusalem and all over Israel and Palestine. These people are coming to the Tomb of Mary, and they are involved in many rituals. One of them is the crawling rituals. What they do is they crawl. What you can see is the icon of Mary, and they crawl under the icon of Mary that is exposed in the Tomb of Mary for 10 days. They bring the icon, and then people can crawl under this icon, and they can do a lot of practices there. So my interpretation was, and it's very short because it's a long story, but my interpretation here is that they crawl under this icon in this grotto that is dedicated to Mary, and presumably the tomb is there. They crawl under it, and through this crawling experience, they relate themselves in a very intimate way to the territory, to the soil, to the land of Israel, Palestine, or especially in the Tomb of Mary, to the land of Jerusalem. So this is just one example. The other example that I can give is also from the Tomb of Rachel. That is also a very complicated story. The Tomb of Rachel is changing a lot in the last few years. And as you can imagine, the fence between Israel and Palestine go through the tomb itself. So in order to get inside the tomb, you have to go through this around the fence. Only Israeli Jews can go and visit this place. So Palestinians can no longer go there, even though for a long time they used to visit the place. Muslims, Jews, and Christians used to worship the place together. Now, most of these people are excluded. So when Jews go there, it's also a political reaction to the fence, and it's also the reading, the singing and praying and readings, and especially the ritual of kissing, the book of Tehillim, is part of, again, this soil ritual, the ritual of territories, of trying to claim these lands, and to show how these lands are part of Jewish totemism.
Wonderful. So you witnessed much of this firsthand. There's a lot of observation that went into it. Could you share with us a favorite experience from your research for the book, a moment that struck you as particularly significant or strange or moving or just interesting?
So there are many, because when you're doing ethnography in all these spaces that are very, very different from each other, your experience to a lot of people, and to a lot of, you have a lot of very strange experiences and very, very funny things. So just let me tell you one story. And the story is about the tomb of Miriam HaKoveset, Miriam the laundress, in Jerusalem, in the cemetery, Givat Shaul in Jerusalem. When I first discovered something about this place, I just read about it in a newspaper, and I was very curious about it. I saw that no one had ever written about it, so I decided to go and do some ethnography. When I arrived to the place, it's a cemetery. I didn't know where was the tomb. Then it was not indicated anywhere where is the tomb. So I asked some people, and some of the people that are working in the cemetery told me, where is the tomb? So I started walking, and then I saw that they were calling a boy, a very, very young boy, that was following me. And he was walking very close to me. I think he was about 8, 9, maybe 10. Hi, Karen. A very, very young boy that was walking, and he had a bottle full of water. And I didn't know what is happening. And I started asking him, and I realized that he spoke Arabic, and that he was a Muslim. So I was walking to this very, very Jewish place, very Jewish tomb, with a Muslim boy with a lot of bottles of water. So he was walking with me, and we arrived to the tomb, and then he started to explain to me what I should do. And I didn't know anything about the place. I didn't know that Miriam HaKoveset was such an important person, especially for fertility matters. And he was explaining this to me. He started pouring some water on the tomb and started to clean the tomb. And when I was asking him about it, he was very surprised that I didn't know anything about it. And then he started asking me how many children I want and what are my problems, and if I have some problems of infertility. And I was very, very, very scared because I didn't want any more children. And I started feeling that this guy is going to change my life now. And this Muslim person was explaining to me all about fertility and infertility and about the power of Miriam HaKoveset. And that was funny and a bit scary as well.
That's an awesome story. Thank you for sharing it. I think you already know, Nurit, that every time you talk about shared holy places and syncretic practices, out of the blue, Karen Barkey shows up. It's inevitable. It's almost like a magical spell.
It was a miracle to see her.
It's a miracle of sorts. Happy to see you, Karen. I have more questions, but there's some clarifying questions from the audience. One of which I'd like to send your way. I'm paraphrasing, but who uses these? Who participates? Who comes to these shrines? Does it tend to be segregated into Jews only approach Jewish shrines, Christians only approach Christians? Are some shared but not others?
Okay, so that's a very good question. The question of sharing in Israel, Palestine is a very unique and special question. So the places that I explored, the Christian places, are open for everybody. So everybody can visit them from different Christian sects and denominations. But when you go and visit them, you see the places are, most of the people will be Christian in Christian places. Most of the people will be Orthodox in Orthodox celebrations. Most of them will be Catholic in Catholic celebrations. As you know, the Orthodox are still using the not the Gregorian time, but the Julian one. So there are differences between the Catholics and the Orthodox. And of course, inside Catholicism and the Orthodox, there are many, many other denominations. I don't have time to explain all that, but and in the Jewish places, this is it's different because Jewish places are exclude mostly other people. So places like Kever Rachel, that the tomb of Rachel, that as I said before, used to be shared in the Karen will also tell you about even in the Ottoman times and even after that, from the beginning of the state of Israel, these places are becoming more and more segregated. So Jewish places are mainly for Jews. So you won't see now Christians and Muslims in these places. So they are not shared. There are many possibilities of sharing. Like, for example, Me'arat HaMachpelah is divided. So you can see Muslims that they have a special time for their devotion, and then it changes for the Jewish devotees that are coming to pray at the place. So it's sharing, but not in the usual way we describe sharing. So they're not together at the tomb of the patriarchs, Me'arat HaMachpelah. So this is it's a very good question, but very, very complicated answer.
Yeah, the question comes from Ben Kastan, and he also wanted to know, when there is sharing, do different religious groups share in the same way? Do they have overlapping rituals, or do they have opposing rituals? In other words, is there true syncretism, or is there, how should we put it, antagonistic tolerance?
Okay, so that's a very, very nice question, but I will have to give examples because each one of the places is completely different. But there is something I can say, that even though people don't share the space, they usually, and this was a surprise to me, in the way they construct the rituals are very similar, and they're becoming more and more similar. So people do share ideas about the rituals and ideas about how to perform the rituals. So one of the things that I was saying before is about body rituals. Body rituals are very, very interesting and very central. So you can see both Jews and Muslims and Christians that are not sharing the space, but they do share the practices.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Did you, were you equally comfortable accessing Jewish and Christian sites? Did you have any trouble either finding them or reaching them or being allowed to participate? Did you get funny looks? Where did you sort of feel more comfortable?
Well, that was also a surprise, because I thought that I will be kicked out from many, many places. And I thought that many people will react very badly to me coming with my camera and with my students, and sometimes with a different kind of people. But I have to say that the reaction was always very good. People were very, very happy to show me the places. And I cannot say, I wish I could, but I cannot say anything about the difference between the people. Everybody was very happy to have me. Of course, in Jewish places, I was not allowed to go to the men's sections, and also in Muslim places. So I was behaving very nicely, but with this nice behavior, I think I got into very easily into many, many places. And so people were very, very happy to have us in these places.
Wonderful. Okay, one last question for me before I go to questions from the audience that are streaming in. What was your biggest surprise? What was unexpected and forced you to sort of rethink your assumption or revealed paradoxes to you that you had not considered before?
So I think part of the surprises, I think I explained. The first surprise for me was because of my background, because I was interested I have to say the truth here, that I was interested in these places because I was interested first in the cult of the Virgin Mary. I started there. It was not about politics, and it was not about the micro and macro level of theory. I was interested in Guadalupe because I was raised in Mexico, and Guadalupe is such an important figure in Mexico. She's a national figure. She's a patron of Mexico. And so she and I was fascinated by her. And when I started reading anthropologists that wrote about her, like my friend Valentina Napolitano, I was very, very jealous. That's the truth. And when I started reading and doing the ethnography in Jerusalem, my surprise was that it's such a different case. That the Mother of God that united Mexico, that is actually a ritual for the entire family. In Israel is the mother of minority, is the mother of the oppressed. And I was very surprised to see that as someone coming from this Mexican background. So that was my first surprise. The other one I think I discussed a bit is the relationship between the text and the ritual, that I was absolutely sure that people will tell me a lot about the reading of the Bible and cite these many texts about Rachel and Mary and and all the other female um, 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 other female in the Bible, but they didn't. As I said before, they wanted to show me how they do the rituals with their body. So it's like more a body talk than textual talk. So I was surprised about that. And the third thing I think was the idea that that people are claiming land via the ritual. So they are doing this ritual not only in order to gain order and the idea of representation that we all study from Durkheim, and communitas from Victor Turner, and the idea of sharing that Karen Berkeley and Dionigi and this group of people that I was reading, and the idea of contestation explained by John Eade and others, and Simon Coleman. I was very surprised that these people are claiming their lands, and it's very much about land and landscape. So that was also a surprise. And I think the last one is really basically that that pilgrims and visitors do the ritual itself looks very similar. The ritual itself in all these places is very similar. It's very about the body and the mimetic activities. So I think all these things were very surprising and very challenging.
Super. So Tobias Müller has a question about these sort of grassroots voices making claim to land. He writes, and you can see the question, I think, Nurit, it's the second from the top. Did you observe these voices to be instrumentalized and mobilized by different factions? Which could mean, you know, how does this play into politics? Is how I understand Tobias's question.
So politics is very central here, but you don't hear anything about the politic itself in the way that I was expecting. People were not talking about politics. I think this is my interpretation, they were doing politics with their own body. So the idea of coming to the place and worshiping the tomb of Mary in Jerusalem when the Intifada is at the peak of its violence is all about going to this place to perform their politics. But there were no, arguments or discussions about politics, even though I was trying to do that. I was trying to ask these questions. People were trying to avoid it. They didn't want to go into that. And I was listening to people talking to each other. This was not, a newspaper politics. It's about coming to the place and doing their rituals as a political activity, and very challenging. People are coming to these places to challenge the idea of contestation, of war, when I was looking at these places, I thought that these places are very political, very violent, and people are coming with this ritual, this very feminine. They feminize the space. They make the space more feminine. So I think this is the politics of these places.
So do you have a Whoa, I'm getting bad feedback. Do you have a hunch of whether this might look different in a shrine associated with a male saint? So I'm thinking, for example, the Cave of Elijah, which is an important fertility site on Mount Carmel. Are the rituals there less feminized, more masculinized?
Well, no, I don't think this is the idea, because you can see in these places, and I worked also in places that are around male figures, you will see a lot of rituals that are identical. But the idea of this big mother, this deity, is very, very different. Because, for example, if you think about Rachel, and I wrote a chapter about that. Rachel is all about the personification of the space. So Rachel is the personified. So the landscape is becoming Rachel. So motherhood and the land are mixed together in the spaces, and this makes them very, very different.
Great. Deborah Berkowitz had two sort of empirical questions. She was curious to know how often the icon of Mary is brought into the grotto. And she was curious to know whether you had to wear certain types of clothing in order to enter these holy sites.
Okay, so about the Tomb of Mary, the celebration at the Tomb of Mary are every year at the August 25. And so they bring out the icon of Mary from the Church of the Matochion, which is very, very close to the Holy Sepulchre. And they take it out only once a year for 10 days. And they put it in they place it in the last room of the grotto of the Tomb of Mary, just for 10 days. And then they take it back. In these two occasions, there are a lot of celebrations, and also in these 10 days, there are a lot of celebrations. But these are the only 10 days that people can see the icon and they can actually touch the icon. And it's very interesting to see what they do. People bring, for example, photos of their family members, and they touch the tomb with the photos. So, so you can see a lot of interesting things there, but it's only for 10 days. And this is the only occasion the icon is brought out. And the question about the clothes is also very, very interesting. People use a variety of clothes. So there is not a very good answer here, because people can come in their just secular clothing with the blue jeans and the t-shirt. And so they can, and they, in that respect, they can, many people that are coming dressed like that are looking for a girlfriend or for a boyfriend. They're not necessarily looking for a religious experience. Nuns and other religious figures are coming with their own clothes. So there is not a very good answer to that. Each one of the places determines the way you have to wear your clothes. Of course, in Jewish places, there are modesty rules. Of course, you cannot go just with a t-shirt or something like that. There are some modesty rules. I hope this is an answer.
Great, great. I'm trying to group questions together because they're coming in fast and thick. So here are two questions which perhaps are related. Because of your emphasis on practice, which I absolutely love, can you say something about, so you said the people you talk to at these shrines are less interested in religious texts. How important is religious doctrine to them? And how important is myth making and storytelling to them? So one of these questions comes from David Rotman. The other one comes from Chris Maunder. Are there recent stories about miracles that happen at these shrines?
Let me start with the doctrine, and then you can read me the other question, because I was thinking about the doctrine.
Yes,
it's really interesting. It's a very good question, and I will have to think about it. But what I can say from my experience is that when people go to these places, they are very, very interested in the practice itself. And I can also say that theology and doctrine and even mythology of places are not the center of the experience. And for example, the tomb of Mary, people do exactly the opposite of what the religious authority wants you to do. For example, the religious authority at the place, what they want you to do is stand and pray, especially the Greek texts, and they want you to follow the script, and they want you to read the text and pray, but people don't want to do that. So it's very chaotic, the place, and there is a lot of struggle between the religious authorities and the visitors. And the visitors can be divided to many sections, to many groups. And each group wants to do what they want to do. They came to Jerusalem, they collected money in order to come to Jerusalem, and now they want to do the things that they dreamt of. They want to perform the rituals themselves and the practices. I think they just don't want to listen to any doctrine or to anything that is imposed on them. And so there are many really funny incidents, but there is also violence in these cases because people want to perform other things. So I hope this is an answer. And what was the second part?
The second one was a question from. Let me leaf back to here. It was from David Rotman. It was about oral narratives and whether you were able to collect stories about recent miracles or prayers that were fulfilled, etc.
Yes. So the narratives are usually when I ask people about what they are doing, they don't really want to answer. You have to understand that. They just want to perform. So they tell me fragments of things, but there are a lot of stories about miracles. Most of them are about fertility, because people to these places, people are coming for fertility reasons. Especially when they go to tombs that are around a female saint. They ask for fertility, especially when they're having some problems of infertility or barrenness. So there are a lot of interesting stories about miracles in these places. And they want to tell these stories. And so they're coming to ask for these miracles. And when they are fulfilled or when they are happy with their lives, they can come back to thank the saint, to thank Mary or Rachel or other female saints. So there are a lot of really interesting stories about that.
Do they leave, milagros the way you would in Mexico? Do they leave evidence?
Milagros and ex votos.
Yes.
Yes, they do. A lot of them leave notes. They can leave clothes. They can leave they can leave water. They can leave a lot of things that in order to appreciate what was happening to them.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. George Quinn wants to know, he writes that in Java, these shrines, which are primarily Muslim, are not primarily about motherhood, fertility, attachment to land, but more about women and commerce, women and business, the status of women in society, the absence of men because the men are migrant workers. Do you find these themes?
Wow, this is really interesting. I want to talk to him about that. No, it's very, very different. No, yeah, it's very different from what he describes. Most of the themes that I see is, like I said before, infertility and problems with livelihood, problems of money, people that are sick, a lot of traumas that are around the family, a lot of issues with health, but it's not about the status of women.
Very interesting.
I didn't say that.
Leah Tarragon-Zeller asks, in connecting your argument with Mary Douglas's work about bodies and borders, if you could say more about how borders are made through these rituals. What types of borders are made and how are they made?
So the idea of borders here is a bit different from Mary Douglas, because what Mary Douglas is doing is she's talking about borders and taboos. And I'm talking about real borders between, for example, between states or in a city that is divided. So between communities that share the same territory on the same soil. So, so you can see different relations here between religious and borders. And here I refer to the territory and the land, like I described before, and not about taboos. So I'm talking about the way that people are experiencing borders and the sacred as a way as a way to justify their identity and to justify their belonging. For example, Palestinians in Jerusalem, coming to Jerusalem, they use these places as a way to connect themselves to the place itself, to the land and the territory.
Caroline Lehman noticed something you said that made me jump out of my seat too. You used the word violence very quickly and then you moved on.
Yeah, it's true.
Whose violence against whom? What kind of violence?
Okay, in my ethnography. Okay, so because violence in the Middle East has a lot of levels, but if we're talking about the ethnography, for example, during celebrations, you can see, for example, different communities that can fight around the way they want to perform the ritual. And this can become violent. People can shout at each other. People can be very violent when they want to perform something and they are not, and the religious authorities will not give them permission to do it. So if they came from an Orthodox country and they want to perform the rituals in Jerusalem, and one of the monks doesn't want them to perform it, doesn't want them, for example, to crawl on the floor, this can be a very violent moment.
Fascinating. So Maria Chiara Giorda recalls evidence from middle-age pilgrimages where there's sort of a male denigration of female practice. Is the tension you're describing here, is it primarily between male overseer and female pilgrims? So here's her question exactly is, are men discouraging these women?
It's not necessarily something between men and women. At first glance, I thought about that, but you can see in many places that women that are and that have authority on these places that can react the same. So I have to think about it more clearly because it's a comparison from different periods, but I didn't see it in my cases.
Great. Karen, did you want to ask a question? I want to give you the opportunity to voice.
Yeah,
voice.
Thank you so much. I actually have to admit that I don't know how to put questions into Q&A, so I end up in these meetings and I don't ask questions. So Nurit, I am sorry I missed the beginning, but I was fascinated and I'm looking forward to reading the book, and I'm really happy you gave this presentation at all of our centers and institutes. Berkeley is listening to you, so it's great. I was really interested in how you make the analytic leap from the bodily practices to the claiming of the land. What is the mechanism? What is the narrative? How do you understand that these bodily practices in the shrines mean a claiming of the land? How do they claim the land? I want to have that analytic connection in a sense. I would love you to tell us a few stories, examples of that. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
In 2 minutes or less.
Okay. Okay, I will try. This is a very good question. There are two levels here, Karen. One is the practical level, and the other one is the stories that people were telling me when I was asking them about the practice itself. So the practice, I can just give two examples. One of them is crawling under icons. That is, as you know, in Orthodox places, is a very central practice. And the other one is kissing of books and kissing of the Bible and kissing of icons and other objects in these places. When I looked, and this is my interpretation, when I looked at these places, I see that there is a need for intimacy with the place and with the surrounding, and for example, with Mary, with the icon of Mary. So people are touching the icon, and they are touching the place all over. And when I ask them why they do this, the narratives are always about the territory, about the place, about the fact that they want to return to the place, they want to come back to the place when their father and their mother and grandmother used to come. So they place themselves in the history of the family and of the community. And the third level is the state. And these people are explaining the rituals through the discourse of the territory and of the place. They will use the word Palestine or Israel in order to explain why they're doing these specific rituals. But this is, of course, a much longer answer that you can find in one of the chapters.
Excellent. And you can see in the Q&A, Nurit, that there's a long list of questions that we have not been able to answer, which is the greatest compliment I think you could have possibly had. That and the fact that we've had well over 80 people attending your talk, I think speaks for itself. So first of all, thank you to you, Professor Stadler, for joining us at what is now 11 o'clock at night in Israel. And thank you for sharing your book with us and for having the patience to answer our questions. Thank you to Jewish Studies and to ETA for hosting us. Thank you for the Berkeley Institute for Jewish Law and Israel Studies for co-sponsoring. And I hope I haven't forgotten anybody. Thank you, Karen, for showing up. That was wonderful. Thank you, Nurit.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you.
I wish everybody a lovely day.
Good night for everybody in Israel.
Good night, Nurit. Go sleep. We'll talk later.